Thank you, Paolo. Well done. This is superb. The guys have done so well in terms of getting through this stuff that, in fact, we could have our half an hour of moderated discussion and almost be back on time. So, you're thinking about your questions. I've got one. Paolo, you went to it a couple of times, and Daniel, you went to it as well. This concept of staff turnover, this concept of people staying for a while and going, and the devil's advocate in me has got to say that, is that not the normal state? If one thinks to standard academic training in healthcare, you do your medical degree or you do your pharmacy degree, you work in the public sector for 3 or 4 years, and you move off into the private sector. That's the way it works. And yet we spend a lot of time in these conversations sort of beating ourselves up on the fact that we can't hold on to the staff. So put it to you, and I'd love to hear your comments. Do you think this is something we can change? Do you think it's something we should aspire to change? Or is it a fixed reality that we should just figure out how to work around?
Well, thank you. I think you're right, Ian. I mean, staff turnover is like a natural course now. And we, in developing world, we will always complain that people are leaving the public sector and moving to the NGO world. But when you look at our service, I mean, I just moved from the public sector to the NGO, so I mean, I think that's normal. That's why we try, in Ethiopia, we try to follow a different direction. For instance, we trained forklift operators for PFSA, like 20 of them, and after a year, 16 of them were not there. They left. So what we're trying to do now is, in collaboration with IHS, we're trying to develop team of trainers in PFSA, because people will be moving out, they will transition. So if you have qualified training capacity locally, they will train newcomers and will try to fill in the gap. Otherwise, these people are only few in countries. They are there is a very high demand for them, and nobody provides this training legally. And if they are trained, they can get more money, so they leave. So that's what we're trying to follow. And I agree with you, it's going to continue to be a challenge.
Yeah. Thank you very much. In my case, I use it to work. I'm always from the Ministry of Health as a technical, but then as Medimoc was a parastatal company, the Minister of Health is also nominating one of the administrators for Medimoc. That's why, somehow, I was nominated to go there to work. I stayed there for almost 4 years, and then I came back to the Minister of Health. So I think that the experience is very, very good. Because as a parastatal company, it working as a private company. So that experience which I get there at the private sector, I think that it contributes for my better job here at the Ministry of Health. But what happens in fact is that we have several people who are experienced or working at the Ministry of Health, very experienced, and then they go out to the private sector or to NGOs where they have better salaries and so on. So this turnover of personnel is more frequent. That's why we want to make a strategy to retain people, which pass through to create those cadres, to create more incentives and so on, to try to retain those people. Okay.
Thanks very much. Aaron, I wanted to ask you a question on your petal thing, right, which I thought was absolutely fascinating. If you look at that, so you get to that point, you've done your assessment. In terms of building the action plan, which do you think works better? Do you attack the big inadequacies, or do you leverage the strengths that are already there?
That's a good question, and I think you have to do both. You have to look at the strengths, and I think see what the whole picture tells you. So these building blocks don't kind of, as Daniel was saying earlier, the building blocks don't exist in isolation, so they all kind of influence each other. So while you might say, you know, with the graph on the left, oh, okay, workforce development, we need to do a lot. I can't read all the very small dimensions there, but we need to do something and establish those things. But I think what you really need to see is how all of those things are working together and reinforcing one another. So you might want to leverage the strengths of your policy and planning to then influence something that is a little weaker, but I think what we've traditionally seen and where this has been implemented in lots of countries is building on both and seeing how they kind of reinforce all of the building blocks together.
Thank you. Have you got your microphones ready? Because I've got Briga, I'm going to ask you one question before we go on. So part of our good corporate citizenry as an organization in the private sector, part of one of the things I've got to report every month is what we're doing around environmental impact and environmental management. And it fascinates me, what does the landfill look like of styrofoam and cold chain packs when you're vaccinating 26 million people? Is there an approach that you're taking that actually looks at the consequential impacts of running a cold chain program of that order of magnitude?
That's a big question, and the reason is, again, waste management lies into the lowermost priorities of the program management, maybe just above the human resource management for vaccine logistics. So these are all the lower boxes where the government still needs to think about, because they're busy thinking about how to reach 26 million. Okay, so as part of our work, we are trying to bring in focus to these parts of components very critically, because with cold chain, now you can think about to do vaccination of 26 million, and 26 million is just the new birth cohort that gets added in. So you have got vaccination, the booster doses, and all those things. So the amount of cold chain equipment and the cold chain modalities that get used in, and the life cycle of that, getting them replenished, getting them discarded, waste management, it's a big challenge at this point of time. Yes, we are trying to focus that attention, but this is again on the lower priority post. I admit that.
So lots of hands. So what we'll do, I think if we take 4 at a time, because there's 4 hands I see before me, then we can answer those, and then we'll see what the next ones are. So who's going to get a microphone first?
William Ruben from the Ministry of Health in Tanzania. My question might go to the first presenter, although may catch some few other presenters. Actually, my candlelight is like getting on and off in terms of what exactly we want to address in terms of supply chain human resource. As I can see from different presentation, some people, they are looking at human resource for supply chain based on a higher level specialization, while others, they are looking in terms of either tailor-made sort of a course to pharmaceutical personnel or to sort of administrator, as our fellow from Namibia said. So I'm not getting exactly, if we are creating a cadre, my expectation is that the cadre should have a career path. So in the way we are going, where are we heading? I'm lost a bit. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Leah Hasselbeck from IntraHealth. Thank you for these excellent presentations. It's wonderful to see all the work that's happening. I have a very quick comment and then a question for a colleague from India. In terms of the comment, I've worked for NGOs and hired people away from the Ministry of Health before, and the ministry facilitates that, or the government in general sometimes facilitates that by giving the staff a license to leave for the government for a while, and it's actually been cheaper as an NGO to hire those people because we don't have to pay certain taxes or Social Security. So I think that's something that we need to consider in retention. And then as a question for the colleague from India, for the VCCM position, I'm wondering how much of their work is a function of the population that they serve. So what I'm thinking is that a lot of countries would really like to have this position, but without that level of population or commodities. Is that still a relevant position at a district level, or maybe should that be considered at a different level within the health system?
Hi, good afternoon. Sandeep Maharaj from Trinidad and Tobago, University of the West Indies. One question. I've seen most of the presentations actually deal with the operational part of the supply chain. I'm not seeing many of them dealing with the strategic part. And have you all found that there's any role for these supply chain managers and human resource to be specialized in the public health observatories as well, to deal with demand and so on? Because I haven't seen any of that come across in the presentation so far. And just two comments. One is on the private sector, as said by our friend from Mozambique. We did something like that in Trinidad. It works well. The operational logistics works well. The parts that you leave the government to be in charge of, that falls down, just as most other things. And when it comes to also looking at the Indian context, there was a point brought across in the Indian context of the human resource and human resource retention. I think that's important because I'm the deputy chairman also for the Regional Health Authority, and we have a lot of rurality. And the way to actually have human resource remain is to provide training opportunities at the site itself, where the human resource are being trained, where they work. That site should actually be the point of training. And it should become a continuous training process taking place there. It's the only way to retain them, because we had that problem, and it's actually working well now once they're being trained there on site. All right, thanks.
I really share one point of attrition, because it has been mentioned by all presenters that attrition is a problem. Well, it's a problem because it's a normal phenomenon of organizations in most cases. But what worries is the magnitude, because people live for short and then organizations live for long. There is the concept of going concern, because organizations will live for longer. Therefore, what needs to be done? Is that about the strategy alone? Should we not say anything else about systems, structures? Because I don't think it's only payment which would differ people to the private sector. It could possibly be something related with working environment as well. Do these people have opportunities? That's something that we need to see. Otherwise, having the best strategy, the whole concept is not to eliminate attrition. That's very impractical. It's just to reduce attrition. And then the second question goes to the Indian practice. And then I would love to learn more about it, because Ethiopia is transiting vaccines currently. But the issue of vaccines is still a tricky one. The physical transition is one thing, but there is one important attribute about potency. How do we track that, the potency issues? Because, okay, we are covering so much people, huge number, but do we have any tracking mechanisms that the vaccines go as they are intended to reach the public? Thank you.
These are some great questions, and really interesting that some of them punting hard up the scale at strategy, some of them right down into the operational. It was an interesting observation yesterday we were chatting about after this, the leadership session, saying we were trying to talk about leadership, but we kept defaulting into issues of management, and we were trying to talk about strategy, but we kept defaulting into the issues of transactional day-to-day operations. And it's always hard, isn't it, to hold the conversation into the right level. So as you're answering, let's try and do that. Let's try and get into the operational for the operational questions and hold it back at strategic. Erin, do you want to go first in terms of answering the career path question?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Rubin, for your question. I think there were two parts to your question. One, looking at what do we want to address? The higher level specialization, where you see in some countries they're developing a master's program in logistics, whereas we also have challenges with lower level cadres not having appropriate training. And I think the answer to that is we really need to be looking at both. If we're looking at the end-to-end supply chain, you need both people who have specialization and can think at a strategy level, as our colleague from West Indies was saying. You need all of those things, but it's really dependent on how are you defining your supply chain. And I think related to career path, it's something that PTD has struggled with a little bit. And I kind of put the question back to everybody else in terms of, do you personally think that there's a career, do you have a career path? Every one of us in this room kind of thinking of like, what, do you have a defined career path in terms of where you're going? I don't know where I'm going in 5 years necessarily. So I think we've struggled with having had this question asked of people that deliver, what is the career path for a supply chain professional? And I think some of that's dependent on the organization and the system. And so the assessment tool, one part of the assessment tool is first to define what is your supply chain and what is the organization that we're talking about. And then within that organization, how could someone move up within that system or within that organization? If within PFSA in Ethiopia or within SIMAM in Mozambique, does a forklift driver become a procurement manager eventually through a career path? Maybe, but maybe that forklift driver wants to go work in private sector, trucking, or maybe that forklift driver decides they don't like being a forklift driver and want to go do something else. I think it's hard for us to really make one kind of standard career path. I think we could think about options within different organizations, but I think it's really organization specific in terms of where we want to go. And I think really we need to start on thinking about how are we defining the supply chain? What are the organizations that are within it? What are the positions that are within it? And does it make sense for all those positions to be linked, that you might start as a forklift driver and your career path is to become the director of the central medical stores? Maybe, maybe not. But I think that's something that we wrestle with. And if anyone has suggestions for me for my career path as a supply chain professional, I'll take those after the session.
Forklift driver, yeah. It's really interesting because just when you get all this right, then some bugger comes along and starts asking you about succession planning next, doesn't they? Yeah. So, and I think what you're really pushing hard in there is this concept of depth in an organization. You can't just be training an individual for the job that they're in. You're training them for the potential that they have. You're training them for what the organization is going to require in the future. Daniel, I'm going to ask you to keep going on that thought line, please. This concept of the strategic skill set and versus the operational, this continuous training issue. I was fascinated to see your one bullet point where you actually had defensive driving techniques and forklift driver training in the same line. And I was trying to see how you do defensive driving techniques for forklifts. But I mean, that's a whole separate issue. But do you want to give us some thought of your thoughts on what you think you need to be doing? Because as I said earlier, my personal perception, having watched your team in action for a number of years now, is that you've got it further right than anyone else I've seen in terms of this depth creation.
Okay, thank you. Apologies for the defensive driving and forklift operators bullet point. In fact, there are two different trainings: defensive driving for truck drivers and forklift operation for the operators. So it's just put in one slide. But regarding strategic direction and having a career path, I think there is also another point of view, not to challenge you, but in Ethiopia, for instance, we had this health extension program where we deployed like 16,000 health extension work, 38,000 health extension workers to 16,000 health posts in the very rural part of the country. And these people were trained for 10 months after they finished grade 10 high school, and there was nothing planned for them. They'll get some amount of money, and that will be their job for the rest of their lives. But after a few years, like a year or two, they started challenging the government. They said, so where am I going to go to next? am I going to get a chance to get a nursing training or so? And it was a big debate. And the idea, but originally was, I can be corrected by my colleagues here, the idea was to train them from the local, select the trainees from the local people, to train them and deploy them there, and they will not go anywhere. They will stay there and serve the people. They will be serving only 5,000 population in each kabale, which is the smallest administrative unit in Ethiopia. But finally, the government bought the idea. So now they have a very defined, clearly defined career path. Then they were trained to receive their 2 years diploma, and now there is also another plan for them to train them in, so that they can get their degrees as well. So that's also another way. But if it works for supply chain or not is another issue. And to comment on my friend's questions about the strategy, yeah, we focused on operational activities because that's what we are probably, in my case, that's what we are working on very strongly because that's easy to do. But when it comes to strategy development, we're working with the Ministry of Health. Our problem in Ethiopia was we did not have a clear direction from the government as to who leads the process and who's responsible for HR, for SM issues. So we've been talking to PFSA, we've been talking to Ministry, Regional Bureaus, and Ministry of Education, but no one really was assigned as the lead. But now we know that the Ministry of Health is involved, so we're working with them. So the idea is to assess the situation first based on the tool that Erin discussed. So we have to know what kind of skill sets are required at each level and what do we have in the ground, what the gap is, and then try to fill it. I think that will be realized in the coming few months if we keep on pushing and working with the Ministry of Health. Thanks.
Thanks, Daniel. Paulo, you've lived on both sides. Right? You've lived in the private sector, you've lived in the government sector. Do you think it's just about money? Do you think there's a whole bunch of other stuff that actually talks to retention? Do you think we heard comments about environment and benefits, about continuous training. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, in fact, not at all. Not only money. As was one of the colleagues saying, is that also the problem of environment, working environment, is also very important. That's why we are creating those collective incentives, which are, to create better conditions there in the place, like to buy new, very nice chairs, very nice computers, and also to organize the place to make it much better. But also we are doing this issue of coaching and mentoring, which is to incentivize people, to show them that to reach the objective is also good for everyone. To make better services to the population is also good for. So this also helps us to improve the better condition, working condition there at the place. But also I would like to say that when we talk on the personnel for the supply chain in Mozambique, as also I heard from Namibia, is that we are looking only for pharmacy technicians and pharmacists. But if you see the activities at the warehouses, because for supply chain, they mainly are the warehouses, central warehouses, provincials, district warehouses, but then you have the facilities. Okay, at the facilities for you to deliver the goods for the population, okay, you can need there a pharmacy technician or a pharmacist. But then at the warehouses, the most activities are logistician activities. That's why we want to create this position of logisticians, and we want to train people as logisticians, which doesn't take much time like to train a pharmacist. You see, this is our strategy. So when you say we move to strategy to management activities, is that in a process of doing strategy, you have a vision and then you have objectives and so on. But then you come to activities for you to try to work to reach that vision. So you have to come to activities. There's no way. So yeah, this is what I can say. Sorry. There is an issue. In terms of outsourcing activities, what we are doing now is outsource transportation and outsource custom clearance. You see, I think that those activities, it's much difficult to bring them for the government institution. That's why we are outsourcing them. We have difficulty if you will try to outsource warehousing, to give out the warehouse. It's much difficult to get authorization from the minister. But then there are activities which you can do so, and it's better to do so. It's much difficult to manage yourself. Thank you.
Thanks, Paula. And Brady, you've got two questions. The one was the question about potency and how we track potency, but then the other one was this, which I think a fascinating question that says, so does your economy of scale actually play in your favor and allow you the space to create this VCCM job, or do you think it is something that could be done in a more spread out population?
Thank you. So I'll try to answer. Talking about creating a position of VCCM at district level. So at district level, it's because in India and in many parts of the world as well, district is the fulcrum or the point of turnover and management. So everything comes to a district, and every supply that comes to a district and then gets managed from the district to the lower nodes. So all decision-making powers, all financial availability, everything holds on at the district level. So if you want to really do a management, you need to have somebody sitting at the district and doing that management. Now, catering to a population based on that district, that depends upon whether you need one manager at a district or two managers at the district. But placing a manager below district level on a block level or a lower population doesn't serve the purpose well, because then the modality becomes very small and the decision-making power again remains at the district. So everyone, even if the lower node, needs to go back to the district to have something done. So actually keeping that focal point at the district level where you can actually do decisions and make transitions is the reason of keeping a VCCM at the district. Now, and thank you for making a point of on-site training, and we figured out that very well. The problem that we face is, and the attrition part, especially in immunization, is not about a government employee moving to a private sector. It's about a government employee moving from one role to another. So my A&M or my nurse moves from immunization to malaria suddenly, and a new A&M is posted. So there is no transition, but the new person is there suddenly. So how do we manage that? And that's a very frequent turnover. So that was the reason why we created a supportive supervision mechanism into the VCCM's role, that he should have that capability because he has a fixed routine to go all these points, so that when he visits a point and has a new person contacted, do an on-site mentoring, training, hand-holding, and pay attention to that, so that till the time a bigger training is organized, you don't have a non-trained person working upon. And that was the mold. So keep the training going on and do an on-site training. Coming to the path of cadre creation, we have also taken that into consideration, because the proposed strategy of the government is to have a VCCM at the district level, but also to have the superiors at division and state level, and a national level. So there is actually a path of cadre creation, so where you can have a progressive thing and move upon that part. With now the bigger scale up going on and with government thinking in that way, I hope that we'll be able to do that. But yes, definitely that will be a spread out manner, that will not be on one short basis, but on a slow and progressive basis to have actual people handling vaccine logistics management. And I'd say beyond vaccine logistics management. Then coming to the point of potency, and I intentionally skipped, so you remember the three questions that government asked us. The third was whether the vaccines are under recommended temperatures. To ensure potency, what we are doing is we are installing SIM-based, mobile-based temperature loggers at each and every cold chain equipment. So you will have real-time data available from every equipment to ensure that your temperatures are not violated. We already have vaccine vial monitors available on each vial to ensure that vaccines are not exposed to high temperature. But the recent findings say that because of that sensitivity towards VCCM, people have turned their fridges into deep freezers. And so you might have chances of freezing vaccines, and a large quantity of your vaccines are very sensitive to freeze. And so that's why we are now going on a real-time temperature monitoring system so that you don't end up spoiling vaccines and then destroying it, but getting alerted at a time and then taking appropriate action to prevent damage rather than to just discard. So that's the potency thing that we are working upon, but maybe later in the time we can share upon that. To know more about the EVIN, what I am, at this point of time, I'm carrying a small film of a 10 minutes English film on EVIN. If we get a chance, we'll screen that. Otherwise, you can contact me and I can guide you, take you through more details of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brigo. I think in terms of time, we've pretty well used up our 30 minutes. Is there anyone got a last burning question that they would really like to pose to us, or shall we head up the stairs for our eats? Can we have one microphone down that side, just from there? And then just to remember this session that's going on during lunchtime in Auditorium 3 on the introduction of the PSM Toolbox, IAPHL and laptop. And then, of course, Erin's support group on career planning will also be taking place.
Thank you. I'm Dr. Iwan from Ministry of Health of Indonesia. Represented Mu Engko because he said to present in other hall. I think, Erin, the discussion about who is the SCM health resource already discussed from the beginning we meet. Is it a specific health workforce or just any health workforce with specific competencies? We don't know yet about that thing. In Indonesia, we have, fortunately, we have a regulation, law number 45, that the drugs will be responsibility by a pharmacist. So it's easier for us. That's why in our strategy is how to the pharmacist become a SCM health workforce, just to add it in the curricula and in-service training. So that the question is, who is the SCM? Maybe Tanzania asked about that. Is this high specialty or what? That's my question. Thank you.
And as you're going to get the last word, I want to add a little bit to that says, so we keep having this conversation about saying we have to advocate for change that gets us out of this hole that has pharmacists and doctors being mandated to be the supply chain official. What's the first step? How do we turn that into action? How do we stop it being a statement we must advocate and turn it into an action plan?
So I think it's a great question. Thank you, Dr. Setyawan, for that question. I think one of the things I go back to again is it's looking at the context of your country. So we don't have a one-size-fits-all. The supply chain workforce needs to be this level of personnel. So you need to take into account laws. You know, if it is a pharmacist that's designated to only have control over medicines, then we potentially need to work within that. But in the example of Namibia this morning, I think what we've seen in Namibia is that by doing a competency mapping exercise, by looking at each level, in Namibia we focused primarily on the central level, the central and regional medical stores. But if you could, in your countries, look at each level of the system of the supply chain and look at what are the competencies or what are the responsibilities of the supply chain, and regardless of who the person is or what their training is, but first look at like what are the requirements, the required things that have to happen at the central level, and not just at the medical store, procurement, budgeting, finance. Who are the people that are involved in those activities? Go down to a regional or district level. So they're warehousing, but again, management responsibilities. And how do you then, after taking that competency map and developing that, figuring out who does those things, some of those things now, but to think a little outside the box of who could be doing those things. And in Namibia, the competency map that we did has opened up a discussion of maybe we only have 11% of the pharmacists in Namibia working in the public sector for 85% of the population. Maybe there's a better use of time of those 11% of those pharmacists instead of working as a distribution manager in the central medical store, but maybe that pharmacist actually needs to be on the essential medicines committee, working with procurement committees. And so then to open up the conversation as to other cadres, and maybe we don't know who they are yet. Maybe they're pharmacy technicians, maybe they're business students. We don't really have an answer as of yet as to who the workforce is, but I think it's important for us to think about first what's required within our supply chain, and then from there, think a little more outside the box. I think Moto has a follow-up thought.
I want to take this opportunity to say that we have Tanzanian team in this room that they just did an HR assessment, and they could answer to that question. That it's a thing that during the assessment, you always beat to that people are resistant to see that pharmacists.
Oh, they need the microphone for the translation. Sorry, Moto.
Being pharmacists. So me, I don't want to really to monopolize because we have representative in this room that could better answer, like, because it was recommended there too. And they have a solution of like, how can we move just from pharmacists to create a different cadre that could help. So maybe give to that.
So maybe a moment for our...
So now we've got the Tanzanian delegation is going to have the last word from the floor, and that's actually pretty cool, Mota. But now, is any one of you willing to be the victim to give us the summary response to the question?
Good afternoon. I'm Dorothy Matoyo from JSI Tanzania office, representing Ministry of Health colleagues, who together we conducted the HR assessment in Tanzania. And our experience showed that this is a big battle between the existing workforce, which now implementing the supply chain functions, and the idea of creating a cadre which will be performing the supply chain functions. But the HR assessment is an eye-opener, because from there, that's where you start to sensitize and build the trust of the ministry's official in understanding the perspective of why we have to have a different cadre in terms of when it comes to supply chain. But based on the recommendations which Tanzania came up after the assessment, we had to categorize the needs in terms of how we have to implement and professionalize the supply chains in phases. Because right now, when we propose and we come with a recommendation, create a cadre, those who are performing that function, they reacted. What will be our role? I'm a chief pharmacist. Then we want to create a department or directorate which will be supply chain kind of. So with that language, we have to, as Erin said, not one size fit all. We have to categorize and define the strategy based on the existing workforce. And our first strategy was to look at how we can enhance the existing workforce in terms of skills and knowledge, so that they can be able to perform the supply chain functions accordingly. That was our first step. And second step, which is long-term, is now we are looking towards creating a cadre. No, sorry. The second step was creating a position, because even the pharmacists who are performing the supply chain functions in different level, they also has different tasks to perform. And with that, our justification was if we can come with a supportive position to support the existing pharmacist role, that also will help to give a more weight to the supply chain functions at different level. And then the third step was creating a cadre, a specialty of supply chain. And in my countries, because of, the education institutions is different ministries manage different cadres. So with that, I think as countries, we have to define and come up with a strategy of what needs to be done at different levels to make sure that we reach that third stage of having a cadre in place. But it's a process which I would say we have started with an assessment, and we have developed an implementation plan, which over the years, with the ministry support, and maybe that's why my colleague Ruben have keep on asking that, we will have to agree in terms of how long that will take, and it's a process which we all as country has to undergo. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I didn't even have to give her the 2-minute warning. Did you see that? Yeah. Thank you for your attention, and thank you very much for your input. I mean, to have sat through a session like this and to really be at a point where you've had your opinion moved, where you've actually had that your thoughts provoked by the practical experiences of country leaders on the ground and who are actually out there doing the work is really what we'd hope to achieve. And I certainly have had a number of my opinions influenced by the way in which this has been presented. So to the presenters, thank you very, very much for your input. And to you as the audience, thank you for your participation. Enjoy your lunch.